Namaste. I'm going to start with talking about the spring season and then afterwards share a little bit about my journey with Ayurveda and the 6 seasons. So the season we're in now is spring. And spring, of course, begins the time when the days are getting longer, the sun is getting hotter. We start to see the leaf buds forming on the trees and the flower buds filled with nectar. And then all these buds start to bloom. They burst open, fill the air with pollen. Another thing that's happening in spring is the weather's getting more rainy, often stormy. The air is more humid, more so in other parts of the country, but here in California too. And another thing that's happening in spring is that the trees, the sap of trees, particularly the maple tree I'm thinking about, begins to start thawing out in spring. During the winter, the sap is in the roots of the maple trees, and it's kind of starchy, and it's getting sweeter over the course of the winter. And during the spring, with the heat of the sun, it begins to thaw and move up the tree to provide nourishment to the tree, the branches, the leaves, and the rest of the tree. And it's the time of year that the maple syrup makers will tap into this tree to draw out from this abundance of the liquid sweet sap. And they do this year after year without any harm to the tree. And I'm saying this because it's somewhat similar to what's happening inside the body. During the winter time, the kapha dosha, and is everyone familiar with the doshas? Or some people have no idea what dosha is? So great. Okay, so the kapha dosha, which is a mixture of the water and earth elements, has been accumulating during the course of the winter. This is a natural process. It's the cold and contracting qualities of winter is what's kind of behind why this happens. So kapha slowly and naturally accumulates over the course of the winter. And during the spring, due to the warmth and the heat of the sun, kapha begins to liquefy. And this thawing out process, kind of like the sap in the maple tree, and melting process is the natural way of the body to maintain balance, to bring the body back into, again, a state of balance. So keeping all these, what's going on in mind, we can identify the qualities of spring as being warm, liquid, sweet, like in the sweet-smelling flowers and the taste of the fruits that are coming. It also has that oily or you can almost say oozing quality, particularly when we look at plants and the flowers, we can get a sense of that quality that happens in spring. As well as wet and heavy, and that's kind of as evident in that the warm or the humid, more dense air. So you keep those qualities in mind, we can start identifying what the common symptoms that we experience in spring is. So we'll start with the spring allergy symptoms. These are symptoms like the runny nose, the watery, itchy eyes, the sneezing. Sometimes the hives will have, as far as the allergy symptoms go. There's also those spring cold, common cold type symptoms of the nasal congestion, post-nasal drip that will cause some itchiness in the throat. The phlegm will be there when we have this tendency to want to bring it up, spit it out. And then there can be more serious things like the respiratory problems, feeling a lot of congestion in the chest. Kapha is one of its main sites is here in the chest area. And that can even lead to more serious issues like bronchitis. There are people who experience bronchitis every spring. But the thing is, not everyone will experience these symptoms. So why is that, is the question. Why is it that some people experience these symptoms spring after spring and others never do? And why is it that the same person can experience the symptoms some springs and others they do not? Well, Ayurveda has the answer. It teaches 3 occurrences, or 3 points to kind of explain the spring common symptoms. The first is the presence of the excess kapha in the body. So we just talked about how the kapha accumulates during the winter naturally, and it begins to liquefy in spring. So that is there. Also, a point under this is to keep in mind if you're kapha dominant. In other words, if you have more of kapha than vata or pitta already in your system, and again, kapha is that water and earth element. If you have more of these 2 elements than the other 3, you're going to obviously be more at risk to have the spring symptoms or to have excess kapha. The other occurrence is our state of digestion, or a poor state of digestion, basically. With the poor state, we're more likely to experience all kinds of health problems. But our digestive power is actually the strongest during winter, and it starts to diminish somewhat during the spring, and actually kind of increasingly diminishes as we go towards summer. So that's already what's happening with our digestive state.
Why is that?
That's a great question, and I'll continue on with this, but it also might be a question that you might want to indicate you might want to study further and deeper into Ayurveda, and might be a little bit beyond the scope of this particular sangha. So, but great question. So I probably won't end up addressing that as I say, but a great question. So the state of digestion is happening, and sorry. And again, I just want to emphasize this is something that happens naturally, even in healthy people. That's just what's happening to our digestive system. And then the other point is immunity. So a decreased strength of immunity can make us more susceptible to experiencing the symptoms of spring. During the spring, of course, our immunity is being challenged with the invasion of these naturally occurring pollens that are in the air. So it is being challenged during spring. So basically, I won't go into more detail with this, but this gives us a clear idea of how these spring symptoms occur and why they occur in some people and not others. And it boils down to, if we maintain a healthy state of kapha, we generally can manage the invasion of the pollens. We can manage, our body will manage the allergens. But when we have excessive kapha, we're just more likely to experience the symptoms. Ayurveda teaches that what's happening out there in the environment, in the macrocosm, is also happening on the inside, in the microcosm, as we call it. So we may want to blame the pollen, the flowers, the rain, for our runny nose, the phlegm, and the mucus. But the teaching of Ayurveda tells us to look inside. So when we understand, we can't control what's out there, what's naturally occurring out there, but we can look at what we are doing, or what we can do, which is we can look at what we're putting inside our bodies and the effect that our activities have on our bodies. And that's the way we can manage or prevent the spring symptoms of the spring allergies. So again, just kind of recap, we have this excess kapha from the winter. It's excess kapha naturally liquefying. Our digestion is naturally weakening, and our immune system is being challenged. So we want to make sure that we're not eating foods and engage in activities that's just going to aggravate this whole situation. Ayurveda teaches that all-important concept of like increases like. So really, when we think about that, it becomes fairly easy to understand what Ayurveda recommends for spring, which of course is not antihistamines. It's not that cold medicine that just suppresses the symptoms and without any concern for the cause. It's not that. The science of Ayurveda offers some simple lifestyle and natural recommendations. So I'll start with some lifestyle recommendations. First, some things to avoid. One of the first things to avoid would be eating or drinking anything cold by temperature. So even though it's getting warmer outside, and we do start thinking it's time for ice cream, smoothies, the iced coffee with the cream and the sugar, when we just think of the science of Ayurveda and simple observation, we just kind of look at what's really going on, and knowing that what's outside is going on inside, we can see that it's not the right time for that. They're delicious, but they're cold and kapha-saturated foods. So avoid eating or drinking anything cold by nature. Again, that cold leads to the constriction and the contraction, which is counteracting what the body is trying to do, to thaw out. So some examples of some of those cold things. Again, we talked about the smoothies, ice cream, yogurt, regular yogurt or frozen yogurt, cheese. Even fruit juices are not recommended during this time of year. They tend to be cold, a little heavier to digest, kind of a syrupy quality to them that's already there. Ice water, another example, another thing to avoid. Also, avoid oily foods and deep fried foods. Now, these aren't cold by nature, but they're heavy, very heavy difficult to digest. And in terms of activities, avoid daytime naps. Daytime naps can be particularly aggravating during this season. It contributes to the heaviness, dullness, increase in phlegm. It just invites all the allergy and common cold symptoms. Now, if you do feel tired during the afternoon, actually the best thing to do is to get up and move, take a walk, do something until that feeling passes. But if you find yourself, you just cannot keep your eyes open, a recommendation from Ayurveda is to go ahead and close the eyes, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and rest in a reclining position. Don't lay all the way down and actually fall asleep, but to get that rest, just again by closing your eyes and staying in a kind of upright reclining position. And that's less aggravating than a full daytime nap. All right, so those are a few things not to do. Now we'll look at some of the things that Ayurveda recommends that we need to do to maintain health during spring. And the first thing is eat light. This is in regards to both the food itself and the amount eaten. So lighter foods and somewhat smaller portions. Remember that the digestion isn't quite as good, so you want to eat to your digestive capacity, keeping in mind that it's probably not going to be as much as it was in winter. Exercise daily or at least 5 days a week. This is anything from walking, jogging, hiking, yoga, working out at the gym, your sport of choice. But movement is important. Remember, you want to help the body eliminate this excess kapha, prevent it from stagnating. Exercise increases lightness, decreases kapha. And next, your beverage of choice for this entire season should be hot water. Drink a cup first thing in the morning, sip on it during the day when you're thirsty. And sips of hot water can support the digestive fire. Actually, if you did want to add some of that fresh ginger, like steep it a little bit in the tea, make some hot tea, that's also very supportive of the digestion. But I think one thing I want to really say here, though, is that don't make yourself drink a certain number of cups of water a day. That's not what this is saying at all. You know, drinking that 8 cups of water a day is not an Ayurveda teaching. It's simply saying that when you are thirsty, choose hot water. When you're thinking or craving a cold beverage, choose hot water instead. And remember about all that's going on, so that you can kind of really feel the benefits of what the hot water is doing. And even our beloved hot spice milk can be a little heavy, difficult to digest for some people during this season. Next recommendation, wake up and get out of bed early. An hour or so before sunrise is what's recommended. But as soon as you can, get up out of bed and start moving. But of course, never make giving up out of bed early a reason to take a nap during the day. So avoid those daytime naps. Yeah. And lastly, find time to sit in nature. Spring in particular just invites us to sit and observe. Observe what's happening in the environment. Look at what's going on around you in nature, and let that guide you inward to really look at what's going on the inside. And of course, taking time for quiet contemplation, sitting, moving toward that stillness on the inside is always has a healing effect. So those are some lifestyle recommendations. We'll move on now to some foods, recommended foods and spices for spring. The tastes, there are 6 tastes in Ayurveda. I'm not going to go over them, but the tastes, if you know them, that you should be emphasizing during spring are pungent, bitter, and astringent. And so I'm just going to list some spices that have those tastes in them. Ground fenugreek seeds, or methi, is great this time of year. Mustard seeds, cumin, black pepper, turmeric. Of course, we have our ginger. That could be the fresh ginger. As Reepa had an example of that. And as well as the powdered ginger is good too. Garlic is good this time of year. And onions, if you're going to eat onions this time of year, raw onions are preferred. They're pungent. When we cook the onions, it kind of changes the taste to a more sweet, which is not a recommended taste to favor or emphasize during this season. So raw onions. The qualities of the food that you should be emphasizing should be hot, light, and dry. And so hot, obviously, to help with that thawing process. And this refers to the hot temperature of the food as well as the heating quality of the food. And so all the spices we just mentioned, have that heating quality to it. Honey is great to have during this time. It's heating and it helps minimize excess kapha. We have some actually here in our shop, some raw honey that's local. When it's aged 6 months or more, which is it even has a greater capacity to decrease the phlegm and manage the excess kapha. However, an Ayurveda teaching about honey that's really important is never cook honey, and don't drink it with hot water. If you want to have the honey with water, room temperature or slightly warmish water would be okay. But it's great to have the honey. You can just put it on bread, barley bread, on crackers. Even taking a spoonful by itself is great this time of year in spring. Light foods, some examples of some light to digest foods are bitter melon, moong dal, and khichdi. Does everybody know what khichdi is? Most people do. No? I guess everybody does. Okay, so it's the when rice and moong dal are cooked together, basically, with the seasonal spices and a little bit of ghee. And if you're going to make khichdi this time of year, it's great to put the rice, dry roast the rice before you add it to the recipe, before you cook it. This adds a dryness and lightness to rice, which can be somewhat heavy. A few vegetables to favor for spring would be like fenugreek leaves. That's great to cook and have as in one of your cooked greens as a side dish. Spinach and arugula leaves cooked with spices, or since Ayurveda generally doesn't recommend salads or raw foods, but spring is an okay time to have the occasional small salad. And so spinach and arugula leaves in a raw salad with a little bit of oil and spices would be fine. And carrots cooked with seasonal spices is great this time of year. Light, soft, easy to digest. Those are just a few examples. I'm not going to give you the whole list of foods. Some dry foods to think about are barley and millet. These are grains that are more drying and easier to digest than wheat or rice. So it's if you're going to make hot cereal in the morning, instead of cream of wheat, you could use barley pancakes. You can make millet into either kind of a sweet cereal or a kind of a savory cereal as well. And cooked whole barley instead of rice for some meals is good. And one other thing that's kind of good this time of year is if you like popcorn, which is dry and light, and usually not highly recommended with Ayurveda, but during the spring season, it's okay to have the occasional popcorn. Popping it in ghee is much better rather than a heavy butter or peanut oil. And instead of using salt to season it, salt is not a recommended taste. It has that water element in it, so you do want to watch your salt during spring. You could sprinkle it with digestible spices, as would be found here in Vedika's own spring spice mix. So this is a spring spice mix that Vedika makes here. It lists all the spices here, and most of them are the ones I mentioned, and they're all great for spring. They help the digestive fire and help manage that excess kapha. There's a lot of other uses for this. This is great just to put, if you're going to use the khichdi, you cook vegetables, even if you're going to be going out to a restaurant and you know that it's not necessarily going to be Ayurvedic cooked, you can add this to one of the dishes before you eat it. And it's great if you're going to travel and visit family. That's one of the ways I'd like to use it is to take it with me instead of taking all these little spice bottles with me, just to take this one little packet, and when I cook it at outside of home, very easy to stay in tune and be healthy during spring. So it's a wonderful way to stay healthy during spring to use a mix like this. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to, I'll take questions later. I'll talk a little bit about my personal journey with this Ayurveda, and then I'll see if anybody has any questions. So before I came to Vedika, I had been studying Ayurveda on my own through books for about 8 years or so. I was reading all about the science and really applying it to myself, slowly changing my diet, incorporating it into my daily practices. But even with all of this reading and over the 8 years, there wasn't a whole lot talked about in the books about the 6 seasons. There wasn't any mention of the 6 seasons, and there really wasn't an emphasis, even in the cookbooks, about changing your diet this spring. I was familiar a little bit with which doshas are more prominent during which season, but they really didn't emphasize it, or they may have mentioned it, but it didn't pop out at me about the diets and changing one's food during the seasons. It really wasn't until I came to Vedika, I moved here to California to study Ayurveda here at Vedika about a little over 2 years ago. So it wasn't until I came here that I learned about the 6 seasons. And about the qualities of the seasons and what happens to our digestion during the seasons, and the great emphasis on adapting one's diet and lifestyle during the season to maintain optimum health. So initially, when I did first hear about it, I had quite a bit of resistance. I didn't doubt it to be true, but I just kind of thought, well, it's from thousands of years ago. Maybe it doesn't really apply to this day and age. I also thought, India's pretty far from here. Their climate is quite different. I think it's just for India and their region. Because it's quite a bit different here in the United States, as well as even in California. It's different. So I was really I was struggling with really putting this into application. And when I really thought about it though and contemplated on that, I could see I just had a lot of resistance to changing my diet, really, was what it was about. I had actually, over those 8 years, had put a lot of effort into forming what I thought was my perfectly healthy Ayurvedic diet and lifestyle. So once I kind of got through that and got over that resistance, I reminded myself, I'd come here to learn the science, which I knew contains the truth, and I made it a point to be consciously receptive to what I was learning, and to put a real effort into following these seasonal recommendations and observe what happens. Now for me, I didn't have a disease. I didn't even really have a chronic condition that I was working on or aware of. But the part of this process was kind of reviewing how my state of health was in different seasons. So for example, in the spring season, I could really recall, especially in my teenage years, early 20s, plenty of springs in May when I would have the stuffy nose, be blowing my nose almost all day through the month of May. And when I looked at that, I started associating that with what I had been eating. Springtime for me, late March, for some reason it was sandwich time. So I'd start eating lots of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with cold milk. My cold milk was my beverage of choice. Grilled cheese sandwiches with cold milk. Tuna and egg salad sandwiches with buckets of mayonnaise. And cold milk as my beverage. So, and then it was Easter time around that time, so lots of milk chocolate. And then it would be warmer toward the end of April, and I'd start eating ice cream. Ice cream by itself, with fruit pies, with brownies, ice cream is good with anything. And so obviously, as from taking in what we've all learned, I was building up my kapha. And in the May, I would have the symptoms. And I blame the pollen. It was always a spring allergies. It was a spring issue, and family and myself, I would say, well, as soon as May goes by and summer comes, then the symptoms will go away. So there was never a connection, but at that time. But so that was part of the process. So obviously, what I observed, or it seems obvious now, but since following the recommendations over the past 2 years and staying in tune with nature, it helps prevent the symptoms that you would commonly get during those seasons. It seems so obvious now. But it really has taken over the past 2 years of really taking each season, kind of reflecting in the past, what my state of health was during that season, and looking at how I'm not getting that now. Now, sometimes I'll still experiment. I'll eat something I know is not recommended during the season, like cheesecake in spring. And sure enough, fairly quickly, I'll start noticing the phlegm. I'll start noticing a little bit of nasal stuff going on. And then I go right back to the seasonal recommendations, and usually within a day or two, they resolve themselves. So it works. Ayurveda, it teaches about the 6 seasons, and when you just observe and you kind of have these experiments, you can see that it definitely is working. Another thing in following the seasons is that it optimized my physical and mental health. And by this I mean I didn't necessarily saw these issues as a problem, but they were actually getting better. And those were things like my energy level was improved. Elimination was better. I rarely experienced aches and pains. And my clarity and concentration were better. So again, all these things were getting better. I didn't really see them as a problem before, but following the seasonal recommendations, I've really seen improvement in all of these areas. And lastly, as I'm making choices about what to eat and planning my routine to be keeping or my planner to keeping those seasonal recommendations in mind helps me stay in the present. Or it helps my efforts to stay in the here and the now and the present. Instead of kind of going on autopilot or having something I eat all year round or just eating whatever I fancy, I'm reminded, oh yeah, it's springtime. That's what's going on now. That's what I need to be thinking about right now. So again, it brings me back to this present time. And so following the recommendations starts with the physical health. But when you really make it a part of your life, it serves your spiritual journey as well. So I see that my time is just about up. So thank you all.